So we have the 9th Penguin Modern Classic today, Stanisław Lem, the Three Electroknights. And this is a set of 4 short stories, all of which revolve around planets and the kings that rule the planets. This is science fiction. And the Three Electroknights, it's good to think of this as like the 3 little pigs. These are all sort of like nursery rhymes, or I guess you'd call them fables to do them justice, but there's a reason I'm calling them nursery rhymes, in that there's a lot of terms in this book, like a lot of elements and planets, and it seems very hard to follow and very complex. But a lot of the messages here are quite simple, and the stories do have the level of detail of a nursery rhyme. But that is not a great thing, I think. It's a bad combination of quite a complex, a story of quite complex features, but still a fairly simple message. Now, to give you an idea, here are the 4 stories. So you'll see actually the King Globares and the Sages is actually the longest story in this collection. But the Three Electroknights is the best, and I think there's a reason it's the what do you call the titular story. So we'll talk about that one really. But the stories are all very similar. In the Three Electroknights, we have someone who creates a planet called Cryonia, and Cryonia has lots of jewels on it and can be seen from many other planets. And there are 3 Electroknights: brass, iron, and quartz, all of whom want to get onto Cryonia and get the riches of this planet. But it's a very uninhabitable planet, and there are lots of champions which defend the gold or the expensive elements on this planet. And brass, iron, and quartz, due to their elemental properties, you know, fare better or worse in kind of getting to those, getting to the gold. And then finally there is one sage at the end who says that gold is not worth risking one's life for. And so the message of the story is not to be tempted by material worth when we live in a universe with just many things. And I think this is precisely where the quote, "What use to a being that lives beneath a sun are jewels of glass and silver, stars of ice." So what use are physical objects when we live in a world with the sun above us? So I think there are some nice poetic reflections here about just the materiality of existence. But the thing is, these stories are so they're quite simple and childlike, but at the same time, either due to the translation, but I think more due to the way Lem writes, they're quite inaccessible. For example, here are some sentences from the opening pages. "No, the thought of bodies soft and wet was foreign to him. He abhorred it as do we all. His intention was to construct from water beings truly beautiful and wise, comma, therefore crystalline." Like, these aren't even complete sentences, but they're also just quite awkwardly worded. And on top of that, basically none of these stories, all 4 of them, have any kind of social interaction. It's someone trying to overthrow a king on a planet and they die, or they try to overthrow a king on a planet and there's a trap or something. There's never any meaningful social interaction in these stories. There's a lot of physics and elements and planets, but there's not any degree of character detail to give the weight of the message behind the story any realism. So they come across as a bit preachy, you know, like it'll be like, there's a planet and they try to take over the king, and then it fails, and the message is don't take over the king. And it's kind of like, I mean, okay, but we're not living on planets and we're not overtaking kings. And that could be, you know, a facetious way of looking at it, but given all 4 stories have the same goal and are fairly complex in their understandings of how physical elements interact with each other to cause the kind of conflicts and the interactions. It's quite hard to know the audience for this, and it's just sort of this wall I come across whenever I really try science fiction, with the exception of some few examples like Philip K. Dick, for example. Well, everything he writes, you know, there's some issues with it sometimes, and sometimes it's a bit off the wall, but there's at least some character, there's some humanity in it, which I just don't see in sci-fi. And there are no humans in any of these stories. So yeah, I mean, I was interested in reading it, and I give it 2 stars because as simple and as simple and cold as it was to read, some of the stories are still kind of interesting. He's definitely a world builder. If we're talking about science fiction, there are great setups here if you wanted to create a universe in like a fantasy world. So yeah, in that respect, he has an interesting style of writing. It's very physics based, so if you really like physics, it's great. But I feel like it talks about space and it has a lot about space in it, but it doesn't have the realism to show the real wonder of space, that we are humans on a planet looking up at this vastness. You need to have the humans in your story to have that message conveyed. If we only have robots and planets, then you can't really convey the messages that he wants to. He can't without having more of a human perspective there, because it's hard to relate to anything here, and it's always from the view of the individual that makes the planet vast, which he does often, you know, as in the earlier example, he does come to that as a message, but the message is independent of the narrative that he's made. The narrative is simple and quite tricky to understand because of the elements that's in it, and all 4 stories are fairly similar in that regard. The Three Electroknights is the tightest, and it has less excess outside of trying to serve the message of the story, but you know, it's okay. I will still want to read Solaris by Stanisław Lem, and I've heard that he's influenced a lot of films, a lot of very interesting science fiction films. So I will be giving Stanislaw Lem another try in his 4 works, but I will go into it knowing that he has a strong physics focus and he's not good with people. But still, it's an alright, and it's interesting to see science fiction show up in the Penguin Moderns collection. It's nice that sci-fi can have a shot at being included in the best fiction of the 20th century, given how far we've come with science in that century. So I'm glad there is a sci-fi author in there. I don't know if it should be him, but these aren't the worst, and you can get through them. They're a bit tricky to grasp, but, you know, it's okay. These books are so short, you can just slide on right through them. So, with that, happy reading.